This is the GoPro HERO13, and this is the new DJI Osmo Action 6. Both of these cameras represent the best that each company has to offer when it comes to action cameras. GoPro is that legacy name everyone knows, but DJI has been making some real strides lately, and well, to prove that to you, DJI wanted to reach out and sponsor this video to show you just some of the differences between these cameras. Now, the GoPro HERO13 has been out for quite a while now, and so we probably will get an update pretty soon here, but as of now, if you are looking for the top camera both of these companies makes, well, these are them. And when comparing these together, there's really three main categories I think of. First and most important is image quality. These are cameras, and if they don't look good, the rest doesn't really matter. Second are the features you get with these cameras, and third, and increasingly more important, is the ecosystem. Now, getting right into it, most important for me is image quality. So on screen, you're seeing different shots with these cameras in the same situations. They are all set to the highest settings. And the settings are where each camera has a give and take, because the specs here are noticeably different on both. It all starts with the sensor size. GoPro has a 1/1.9 inch sensor, whereas DJI has a brand new 1/1.1 inch sensor. And so this means the size of the sensor themselves is radically different. DJI has a much bigger sensor. And typically, the bigger the sensor, the better the image is going to look, or the better the image can look, at least. And when you just look at what the size difference is between them, it's a real difference here. And along with that, DJI is using a square sensor, where GoPro is using an 8x7 sensor, so very close to square, but just not quite there. But where GoPro does have a bit of a leg up is that the GoPro HERO13 can shoot in 5.3K at up to 60 frames per second, whereas DJI can only go up to 4K, although it can do that at 120 frames per second, but the GoPro can do that too. And so like I said, the specs here are a bit of a give and take. If you want resolution, well, GoPro does have an edge there, but when it comes to just overall quality and image size, well, DJI has a leg up for sure. And along with that bigger sensor, that allows for higher dynamic range. And so that means it can see into the really bright areas better and the dark areas better. DJI is claiming 13.5 stops of dynamic range here. And so this means in like a shot like this, for example, where I'm in the car, I can see outside of the car and inside of the car pretty well. GoPro has a bit of a tougher time dealing with these types of situations. But both of these cameras are capable of shooting in log and have 10-bit color. So when it comes to color grading and fidelity in that sense, well, they're both great there. But the last trick up DJI's sleeve is the lens. This is the first action camera with a variable aperture lens. So it can go from f2 all the way to f4. And so what that means is that when you're in lower light conditions, well, it can open up that lens to let more light in. And if you're, outside in a bright condition, it can stop that down to, say f4, which should lead to a just overall sharper and more pleasing image. GoPro doesn't have that feature, although any other action camera doesn't have that feature either. But all of that combined for both of these cameras, when it comes to image quality, for me, in my opinion, just looking at them, they both definitely have their own styles. When I'm looking at a GoPro, I can tell I'm looking at a GoPro. And similarly, when I'm using a DJI product, I can tell I'm looking at a DJI product. That's not a bad thing. They just both have their own distinct looks. GoPro kind of has this feeling of softness in a good way, like it's less digital, it's more filmic in that way, whereas DJI feels a little bit more like a digital camera. Again, neither of these are bad things, it's just kind of the way the footage feels. But you can see here on screen, they've been playing side by side. This is the GoPro, and this is the Action 6. Now, aside from image quality itself, there are a few different features here that do come in handy. Like I mentioned, DJI is using a square sensor, whereas GoPro has an 8x7 sensor, so nearly square, but just not quite there. And so on DJI, you can actually shoot in that square format, which means if you want to shoot for, landscape video like this, or you want to shoot for social media and vertical, well, if you shoot in the square mode, well, you can kind of just choose that later. It shoots everything, and later on you can crop to make it look the way you want. And similarly, you could do exactly the same thing with GoPro. In fact, when they first came out with this 8x7 mode, I absolutely loved it because it was the first time you didn't really have to flip the physical camera, because you could almost shoot in a square. So you get a very similar effect there. It's just not quite one-to-one, but that makes these cameras much more valuable, at least to me, because a lot of the times I don't know where the footage is going to be used. A lot of times it's just for Instagram or stories or something like that, but a lot of times it's for a video like this, and being able to just kind of decide that later is a real big help. Now, aside from image and filming itself, there are other features built into these cameras, and both of these are using a real tried and true design and build. They both have screens on the back and screens on the front, so if you're filming yourself, you can see yourself. If you're not, you can just use the back. Although the GoPro does not have a touchscreen on the front, you have to control everything from the rear screen, whereas DJI, you can pretty much do everything on the front screen as well. The screens on GoPro are definitely feeling a little bit dated. The Action 6 has these OLED displays that are vibrant and bright. You can easily see them outdoors. The touchscreens on both work perfectly fine, and the menu systems on both have not really changed much at all. So if you've ever used a GoPro or an Action camera from DJI, they're going to work exactly the way you expect. And these all have a bunch of different shooting modes like slow motion, there's time lapse, there's photo modes. Pretty much everything you'd want is here. They're pretty much equal in that sense. And you can create different profiles and settings so that you can quickly go back to whatever settings you want. You can do that on both cameras. And so in that sense, both cameras are very, very similar. And they're like that for a reason, because it's kind of what works. But there are still some pretty big differences when it comes to the hardware. And the biggest one you'll notice is when you flip the cameras to the bottom. GoPro has the prongs built in for attaching to different accessories, and there is a 1/4-20 thread there. I absolutely love that. The fact that you can just attach this camera right to a tripod without needing any accessories, that is great. And if you are using those typical accessories that all these action cameras use these days with those prongs, well, GoPro has those built right in, so you don't have to like go looking for them. Whereas DJI is taking a different approach. Instead of adding the mounts built into the camera, they're using magnets. So they have this magnetic quick release mount, which this year in the Action 6 is reversible, so you don't have to worry about which way you attach it. And so this means to attach it to different accessories, you're going to use this. This makes taking the camera on and off super easy and fast, but it does mean you need these attachments in order to get it to work. So it's kind of like a upfront investment. Once you have all of these, it's not a problem, but if you don't have them, you're going to need them in order for them to attach. But both of these cameras are compatible with that same type of pronged, accessory system. So in that sense, they're pretty equal. Now, probably my favorite thing about the Action 6 is that this has built-in internal storage. It also has a micro SD card slot, just like the GoPro, but unlike the GoPro, this, you don't need that. You can just record directly to the camera. And this has been game-changing for me. They've been doing this for a few years now, and it really does elevate the user experience. When I get back to the computer, I just plug it in over USB-C, transfer everything over, and that's it. Rather than needing to find my micro SD adapter and figure out where that is and plug it into the computer that way. I mean, I see the argument for both. Some people would say they don't want to record internally because you can just take that micro SD card with you. But considering the Osmo Action 6 has the micro SD card and the internal storage, that's the way to do it. And lastly here, let's talk about battery life. Now, DJI is using the same battery that they have been using for the last few generations. In fact, it's the same battery they use in a lot of their different cameras, like the DJI Osmo 360. And so if you kind of buy into this ecosystem, these batteries are going to work with a lot of the different cameras. And this is rated to run around 4 hours on the Action 6, and I found that to be pretty good. The battery life here is pretty solid. GoPro, on the other hand, is using their new Enduro battery, and this is not a strong performer at all, at least in my experience. I'm talking like 2 hours here of record time. And there are a bunch of minor differences between these cameras that may, sway you one way or the other. But one of the biggest benefits with the Action 6 is that it has the DJI ecosystem. So if that's something you use or something you want to use, well, this is a pretty easy choice. DJI makes microphones, they make other cameras like I mentioned, and these work together really well. I already talked about how the batteries are interchangeable in some of these cameras, so that is nice. But also these have the ability to directly connect to the DJI wireless microphone systems. That's the benefit of having an ecosystem. If you use DJI products, they might work together. They probably will work together, whereas GoPro just doesn't really have that. And really, the way I think about both these cameras might sound kind of silly, but I think it's a good comparison. It's like GoPro is the Apple and DJI is the Samsung. And what I mean by that is that GoPro doesn't really change much. They're kind of the same thing year after year, but it's really solid. You know exactly what to expect. The image quality is great. They do make great improvements year after year, but it's kind of safe. Whereas DJI is really taking risks. They're pushing the boundaries of what these cameras should be. They're expanding their ecosystem, making everything work together. And look, I love Apple products, and one of the main reasons I use them is because of how simple and similar they are to other generations, and you just kind of know how to use them. That's why they're so popular and why I really like them. So that's not a bad strategy at all. But if you care about having just the latest and greatest, well, DJI is pulling ahead here. And so yeah, when you're comparing both of these, DJI DJI definitely has a leg up right now. Like I said, GoPro is probably going to be releasing their latest camera very soon here, so we'll see what happens then. But DJI wanted me to show you the differences of these cameras here. Obviously, there's a bunch of little nuances we can go into about each of these cameras. And if you have any other specific questions, let me know down below in the comments. I've got both cameras here. But I will say this, if you are in the market for an action camera, the market we have right now, well, it's pretty great.